Mike Sullivan thinks he's rescued a dying German Shepherd from the harsh Montana wilderness, but as he helps the desperate animal recover, strange signs begin to surface, unusual markings, extraordinary size, and behaviors that don't match any dog breed he's ever encountered. When he finally learns the shocking truth about the creature in his care, his quiet mountain life is turned upside down. This isn't a German Shepherd at all. So what is it, and what will happen when a life-changing choice must be made? Before we dive into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. The late autumn wind howled through the pine trees as Mike Sullivan trudged along the familiar hiking trail, his boots crunching through the fresh layer of snow. 20 years of military service had left their mark on his body, but the crisp mountain air and solitary walks helped ease both his physical and mental burdens. Pine Ridge, the small Montana town he'd called home for the past 3 years, offered the peace he'd been searching for after leaving the army. The setting sun painted the snow-capped peaks in brilliant oranges and deep purples, signaling it was time to head back to his cabin. Mike adjusted his worn leather pack, the same one that had accompanied him through 3 tours in Afghanistan, and turned toward home. The temperature was dropping quickly, typical for November in these parts. A sudden sound caught his attention. A weak whimper carried on the wind, barely audible above the rustling pines. Mike froze, his veteran's instincts kicking in as he scanned the surrounding forest. Years of training had taught him to trust his senses, and something wasn't right. He stood perfectly still, listening intently as the wind died down. There it was again, a pained whine coming from somewhere off the main trail. "Hello," Mike called out, his voice echoing through the trees. No human response came, but another faint whimper reached his ears. Without hesitation, he stepped off the trail, following the sound into the deepening shadows of the forest. The failing light made navigation tricky, but Mike pulled out his tactical flashlight, sweeping its beam across the snow-covered ground. His eyes caught traces of disturbed snow and what looked like blood droplets staining the pristine white surface. The tracking skills he'd honed during his service came flooding back as he followed the signs deeper into the woods. The whimpering grew louder as Mike approached a fallen Douglas fir, its massive trunk creating a natural shelter. His flashlight beam caught a flash of movement, and there, huddled beneath the fallen tree, lay what appeared to be a German Shepherd. The dog was in terrible condition, its thick fur matted with blood and ice, one leg held at an awkward angle that suggested serious injury. "Easy there, buddy," Mike said softly, slowly approaching the injured animal. The dog's eyes, glazed with pain and fear, tracked his movement. Despite its weakened state, Mike could see the unmistakable build of a German Shepherd, or at least what he thought was a German Shepherd. Something about its size and coloring tugged at the edge of his awareness, but in the growing darkness, getting the animal to safety took priority. Mike shrugged off his pack, pulling out the emergency blanket he always carried. The dog watched him warily, but made no aggressive moves as he inched closer. "I'm not going to hurt you," he murmured, keeping his voice low and calm. The same tone he'd used countless times to reassure scared civilians in war-torn villages now served to soothe the injured animal. The dog's breathing was labored, creating small puffs of steam in the freezing air. As Mike got closer, he could see the animal was desperately thin beneath its thick coat, its ribs visible even through the matted fur. The leg injury looked serious, and in these temperatures, the animal wouldn't survive the night without help. Mia Martinez, the local veterinarian, lived just on the outskirts of Pine Ridge. If he hurried, he could get the dog to her clinic before it closed for the night. Mike carefully spread out the emergency blanket, preparing to move the injured animal. "This might hurt a bit, but we need to get you somewhere warm," he explained, knowing from experience that even animals seem to respond to a calm, steady voice. With gentle but firm movements, Mike managed to slide the blanket under the dog. The animal whimpered but didn't resist, either too weak or somehow sensing his intention to help. As Mike carefully wrapped the blanket around the dog's body, he noticed several unusual features. The animal's head seemed larger than typical for a German Shepherd, and its fur pattern didn't quite match any he'd seen before. Lifting the wrapped dog took considerable effort. It was remarkably heavy, despite its emaciated condition. Mike's old shoulder injury protested, but he gritted his teeth and stood carefully, cradling the bundle against his chest. The dog's body trembled violently, whether from cold, pain, or fear. He couldn't tell. The journey back to the trail seemed to take forever. Mike picked his way carefully through the undergrowth, trying to keep his precious cargo as steady as possible. Each whimper from the dog sent a pang through his heart. He'd always had a soft spot for German Shepherds, having worked with them extensively during his military career. The lights of Pine Ridge began to twinkle in the valley below as Mike finally reached the main trail. His truck was parked about a mile ahead, and darkness had fully settled over the mountains. The temperature had dropped even further, and the dog's trembling had intensified. Mike quickened his pace as much as he dared, his boots finding secure purchase in the snow-covered path. When he finally reached his battered Ford pickup, Mike's arms were burning from the strain. He carefully arranged the blanket-wrapped dog in the passenger seat, cranking up the heater to full blast. Under the truck's dome light, he got his first clear look at the animal's face. Something about its features sent an odd chill down his spine. The proportions seemed slightly off, the eyes set differently than he remembered from his military working dogs. Mike shook off the unsettling feeling, attributing it to poor lighting and the animal's injured state. He pulled out his phone, relieved to find he had enough signal to make a call. Mia Martinez answered on the third ring, her voice tired but professional. Pine Ridge Veterinary Clinic. Mia, it's Mike Sullivan. I found an injured German Shepherd up on Cooper's Trail. It's in pretty bad shape. Any chance you're still at the clinic? There was a pause on the line, and Mike could imagine Mia checking the time. It was well past the clinic's normal closing hours. Bring it in, she said, without hesitation. I'll wait for you. Mike thanked her, already putting the truck in gear. The dog hadn't moved from its huddled position, but its eyes remained fixed on him, reflecting the dashboard lights with an unusual intensity. The drive into town seemed to take ages, though. It couldn't have been more than 15 minutes. Mike found himself constantly glancing at his passenger, speaking soft words of encouragement whenever the dog's whimpers grew louder. The animal's size continued to nag at him. Even accounting for its thick fur, it seemed larger than any German Shepherd he'd encountered during his service. Mia was waiting at the clinic's back door when Mike pulled up, her dark hair pulled back, in a practical ponytail. She held the door open as Mike carefully lifted the blanket-wrapped bundle from the truck. Under the bright security lights, he noticed Mia's expression change slightly as she got her first look at the animal. Let's get it inside, she said quickly, leading the way to the examination room. The familiar smell of antiseptic and the warm air of the clinic wrapped around them as Mike gently placed his burden on the padded examination table. As he stepped back, Mia moved in with practiced efficiency, her hands already reaching for the blanket. Where exactly did you find it? She asked, carefully unwrapping the dog. Mike described the location and condition in which he discovered the animal, his military training automatically providing clear, precise details. As the last fold of the blanket fell away, Mia's hands stilled for just a moment, her eyes narrowing, as she studied the creature before her. Mike, she said slowly, her voice carrying an odd note that made him stand straighter. How sure are you this is a German Shepherd? The question caught him off guard. He'd worked with military dogs for Years. Of course, he knew what a German Shepherd looked like. But as he stepped closer to the examination table, those subtle differences he'd noticed earlier became more pronounced under the bright medical lights. The dog's head was too broad, its muzzle longer than standard breed specifications. The fur, though matted and dirty, showed unusual markings he'd never seen on a German Shepherd. And those eyes, now fully visible in the clinical lighting, were set at an angle that sent another chill down his spine. "I've been a vet for 12 years, Mia continued, her hands moving carefully over the animal's body, and this isn't quite adding up. She reached for a measuring tape, her movements precise as she documented the creature's dimensions. The skeletal structure, the muscle mass even in this weakened state, the dentition. She trailed off, making rapid notes on a clipboard. Mike found himself rethinking every assumption he'd made in the fading mountain light. The animal on the table was definitely canine, but as he studied it more closely, he realized Mia was right. This was something different, something that didn't quite fit any domestic dog breed he knew. Mia's hands moved methodically over the injured animal, her professional demeanor masking the growing sense of unease Mike could see in her eyes. The examination room's fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, casting harsh shadows that seemed to emphasize the creature's unusual features. As she worked, Mia dictated observations into a small digital recorder clipped to her lab coat. Patient. Presents with severe dehydration, possible fracture of the right hind leg, and multiple lacerations, she began, her voice steady despite the uncertainty of the situation. Core temperature is significantly below normal. Estimated weight approximately 140 pounds, far exceeding typical German Shepherd standards. Mike leaned against the counter, his military-trained eyes catching every detail of Mia's examination. The creature remained surprisingly calm under her touch, though whether from exhaustion or temperament, he couldn't tell. Its breathing had steadied somewhat in the warm room, but each inhale still carried a concerning rattle. "Can you get me the warming blankets from the supply cabinet?" Mia asked, not looking up from her work. Mike moved quickly to help, his boots squeaking against the clean linoleum floor. As he returned with the blankets, Mia was preparing an IV line with practiced efficiency. "We need to get fluid started immediately. The dehydration is severe." The creature whimpered softly as Mia inserted the IV needle, but made no attempt to resist. Under the bright examination lights, its fur showed subtle patterns Mike hadn't noticed in the forest. Unusual striping along its flanks and a distinctive mask-like marking around those unsettling eyes. The coloring was unlike anything he'd seen in his years of working with military dogs. "What about the leg?" Mike asked, helping Mia arrange the warming blankets around the animal's trembling form. She gently manipulated the injured limb, her fingers probing with professional precision. "Definitely fractured, but I won't know the full extent until we get X-rays. First priority is stabilizing the core temperature and addressing the dehydration." She moved to a cabinet, returning with several vials and syringes. "I'm going to administer pain medication and a broad-spectrum antibiotic. Those wounds need cleaning, but it'll have to wait until the patient is more stable." Mike watched as she prepared the injections, his mind turning over the peculiarities of their patient. The animal's size alone was remarkable, even accounting for its thick winter coat. It was substantially larger than any German Shepherd he'd encountered during his service. The head shape, too, seemed wrong somehow, with a broader skull and more pronounced jaw than the breed standard. "Mia," he began hesitantly, "in all your years of practice, have you ever seen anything quite like this?" She finished administering the medications before answering, her expression thoughtful as she disposed of the used syringes. "No, she admitted finally, pulling off her latex gloves and reaching for a fresh pair. The overall structure suggests canine, but there are significant anomalies. The dentition, for instance. She carefully lifted the creature's lip, revealing impressive teeth. The canines are longer than typical for a domestic dog, and the jaw structure is different, more robust. The animal's eyes tracked their movements with an intelligence that made Mike slightly uncomfortable. Despite its weakened state, there was something distinctly wild in that gaze, something that stirred old instincts he'd developed during his years in the service. A sharp knock at the clinic's back door made them both jump. Through the window, Mike could see the familiar figure of Tom Bishop, Pine Ridge's senior forest ranger. Mia quickly moved to let him in, the cold Montana night air swirling into the warm clinic. "Heard on the radio you found something interesting up on Cooper's Trail," Tom said by way of greeting, stamping snow from his boots. His weathered face showed keen interest as he approached the examination table. Word travels fast in small towns. Tom's expression changed as he got his first clear look at the creature. The ranger's 30 years of experience with local wildlife showed in the way his eyes narrowed, taking in every detail of the unusual animal. He pulled out a small notebook, already making rapid notes. "Location exactly?" he asked, his tone shifting from casual to professional. Mike described the fallen Douglas fir and the signs of blood he'd found in the snow. Tom nodded, continuing to write. "Any tracks in the area? Signs of others?" "The snow was pretty disturbed around the site," Mike replied, recalling the scene. "But I was focused on getting the animal to safety before dark. Didn't do much tracking." Tom grunted in acknowledgement, moving closer to study the creature's distinctive markings. "Been getting strange reports from some of the outlying ranches," the ranger said slowly, still making notes. "Livestock acting spooked, unusual tracks, weird sounds at night, nothing concrete," but he trailed off, reaching into his jacket pocket for a phone. "Mind if I take some photos? Need to send these to the wildlife department." Mia looked up from checking the IV line. "Just no flash photography for now. The patient is still in shock, and we need to minimize stress." Tom nodded, carefully documenting the animal's unique features with his phone camera. "Might want to get some security cameras set up," he advised, putting his phone away. "Once word gets out about this, you'll have every curious local trying to get a peek." Mia was already ahead of him, pulling up the clinic's security system on her computer. "I'll have Jake install some additional cameras first thing tomorrow," she said, referring to her tech-savvy teenage son. "For now, we'll move the patient to the isolation room in the back. It's more secure, and we can better control the environment." Mike helped Mia prepare the isolation room, which was typically reserved for severe cases requiring quarantine. The small space was equipped with its own heating and monitoring systems, and importantly, had no windows through which curious onlookers might peer. As they carefully transferred the creature to its new location, Mike noticed its fur was beginning to dry, revealing more of those unusual markings. The animal's mass was even more impressive now that it was fully stretched out on the padded bed they'd prepared. Despite its emaciated condition, its shoulder height alone was remarkable. "I'll stay tonight," Mia announced, checking the monitors. They'd attached to track vital signs. "Jake can handle himself for one evening, and I don't want to leave until I'm sure the patient is stable." She looked at Mike, a silent question in her eyes. "I'll stay too," he said without hesitation. His small cabin could manage without him for one night, and something about this situation made him reluctant to leave. Those years of military service had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now they were telling him this was important. Tom finished his documentation and prepared to leave, pausing at the door. "I'll make some calls tonight. See if any other rangers in the region have reported anything unusual. Should have some information for you by morning." He glanced back at the isolation room, his expression unreadable. "Whatever this is, it's going to attract attention. Be prepared." After the ranger left, Mia and Mike settled in for a long night of observation. The creature's vital signs were slowly improving, its breathing becoming more regular as the medications took effect. Every hour, Mia checked its temperature and reviewed the monitoring equipment, making detailed notes in what was becoming a substantial medical file. Mike found himself drawn to the isolation room window, watching their unusual patient. Despite its injured state, there was an undeniable power in the creature's frame, a wild dignity that seemed at odds with its current surroundings. Those eyes, when they occasionally opened, held a depth of awareness that stirred something in his memory, a half-forgotten encounter from his service days in a remote mountain range on the other side of the world. Mia's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "The blood work should be ready soon," she said, checking her watch. "Might give us some answers about what we're dealing with." She paused, studying the creature through the window. "Though I'm starting to think we might need to prepare ourselves for some unexpected results." The quiet of the late-night clinic wrapped around them, broken only by the soft beeping of medical equipment and the occasional whimper from their mysterious patient. Outside, the Montana night deepened, and somewhere in the distance, a lone wolf howled at the moon, its cry echoing off the snow-covered peaks. Inside the isolation room, the creature's ears twitched at the sound, and for just a moment, its eyes opened fully, reflecting the dim light with an almost prehistoric intensity. The clinic's old wall clock ticked steadily toward midnight as Mia studied the blood work results on her computer screen. Her forehead creased in concentration. The soft glow of the monitor cast blue shadows across her face, making her expression even more intense. Mike sat nearby, nursing his third cup of coffee, watching as she scrolled through the data. "This can't be right," she muttered, clicking back through several screens. The cell structure, these protein markers. She turned to a thick medical reference book, flipping pages with growing urgency. Mike straightened in his chair, recognizing the look of someone whose professional knowledge was being challenged by unexpected evidence. "What are you seeing?" he asked, moving to look over her shoulder at the complex charts and numbers filling the screen. Maya pointed to several highlighted values, though the technical details meant little to him. "The blood chemistry is unusual. The red blood cell count is far higher than anything I've seen in domestic dogs, suggesting an adaptation to high altitudes. The white blood cell patterns don't match our typical canine profiles either." She pulled up another screen, this one showing microscopic images of blood cells. "And look at this cellular structure. It's similar to wolf blood samples I've studied, but there are significant differences." A low whine from the isolation room interrupted their discussion. Through the observation window, they could see their patient had become restless, attempting to shift position despite its injuries. Mia quickly grabbed her stethoscope and headed for the door, Mike close behind. The creature's eyes tracked their entrance, more alert now than it had been earlier. Under the room's soft lighting, its fur had dried completely, revealing intricate patterns that seemed to shift with each movement. The size difference from a standard German Shepherd was even more apparent now. Its shoulder height alone was remarkable, even lying down. Maya checked the IV line and vital monitors, her movements gentle but precise. "Temperatures normalizing," she reported, making notes on the chart. "Heart rate and blood pressure are stabilizing too. Whatever this is, it's incredibly resilient." She carefully examined the injured leg, which they'd temporarily immobilized. "We should be able to get X-rays in the morning once it's stronger." Mike found himself drawn to the creature's face, studying those unusual features that had first caught his attention. The shape of the skull, the set of the eyes, the distinctive jaw structure. It all stirred something in his memory, a half-forgotten briefing from his military days in Central Asia. "You know," he said slowly, "this reminds me of something I saw during my last tour. We were stationed in a remote mountain region, and there were local legends about He trailed off, not wanting to sound foolish by voicing his growing suspicion. Mia looked up from her examination, catching something in his tone. Legends about what, Mike? The creature's eyes seemed to focus more intently, as if it too was waiting for his answer. Before he could respond, a sharp tap at the clinic's front window made them both jump. Through the blinds, they could make out several figures peering, in their breath fogging the cold glass. Mia's expression shifted from surprise to annoyance. "Looks like Tom was right about curious locals," she sighed, heading for the front desk. "I'll handle this." Mike stayed with their patient, listening as Mia firmly but politely dealt with the late-night visitors. Her voice carried clearly through. The quiet clinic. No, they couldn't come in. Yes, the animal was receiving care. No, she couldn't discuss the details. When she returned, her face showed concern. "News is spreading faster than I expected. Mrs. Henderson from the diner was out there, and you know how she loves to talk. By morning, half the town will be speculating about what we've got here." Mike nodded, understanding the implications. Pine Ridge was a small town, and unusual events didn't stay secret for long. "Maybe we should get some professional guidance," he suggested. "I know some people from my service days who might have relevant experience with unusual cases." The quiet of the late-night clinic wrapped around them, broken only by the soft beeping of medical equipment and the occasional whimper from their mysterious patient. Outside, the Montana night deepened, and somewhere in the distance, a lone wolf howled at the moon, its cry echoing off the snow-covered peaks. Inside the isolation room, the creature's ears twitched at the sound, and for just a moment, its eyes opened fully, reflecting the dim light with an almost prehistoric intensity. The clinic's old wall clock ticked steadily toward midnight as Mia studied the blood work results on her computer screen. Her forehead creased in concentration. The soft glow of the monitor cast blue shadows across her face, making her expression even more intense. Mike sat nearby, nursing his third cup of coffee, watching as she scrolled through the data. "This can't be right," she muttered, clicking back through several screens. The cell structure, these protein markers. She turned to a thick medical reference book, flipping pages with growing urgency. Mike straightened in his chair, recognizing the look of someone whose professional knowledge was being challenged by unexpected evidence. "What are you seeing?" he asked, moving to look over her shoulder at the complex charts and numbers filling the screen. Maya pointed to several highlighted values, though the technical details meant little to him. "The blood chemistry is unusual. The red blood cell count is far higher than anything I've seen in domestic dogs, suggesting an adaptation to high altitudes. The white blood cell patterns don't match our typical canine profiles either." She pulled up another screen, this one showing microscopic images of blood cells. "And look at this cellular structure. It's similar to wolf blood samples I've studied, but there are significant differences." A low whine from the isolation room interrupted their discussion. Through the observation window, they could see their patient had become restless, attempting to shift position despite its injuries. Mia quickly grabbed her stethoscope and headed for the door, Mike close behind. The creature's eyes tracked their entrance, more alert now than it had been earlier. Under the room's soft lighting, its fur had dried completely, revealing intricate patterns that seemed to shift with each movement. The size difference from a standard German Shepherd was even more apparent now. Its shoulder height alone was remarkable, even lying down. Maya checked the IV line and vital monitors, her movements gentle but precise. "Temperatures normalizing," she reported, making notes on the chart. "Heart rate and blood pressure are stabilizing too. Whatever this is, it's incredibly resilient." She carefully examined the injured leg, which they'd temporarily immobilized. "We should be able to get X-rays in the morning once it's stronger." Mike found himself drawn to the creature's face, studying those unusual features that had first caught his attention. The shape of the skull, the set of the eyes, the distinctive jaw structure. It all stirred something in his memory, a half-forgotten briefing from his military days in Central Asia. "You know," he said slowly, "this reminds me of something I saw during my last tour. We were stationed in a remote mountain region, and there were local legends about..." He trailed off, not wanting to sound foolish by voicing his growing suspicion. Mia looked up from her examination, catching something in his tone. "Legends about what, Mike?" The creature's eyes seemed to focus more intently, as if it too was waiting for his answer. Before he could respond, a sharp tap at the clinic's front window made them both jump. Through the blinds, they could make out several figures peering, in their breath fogging the cold glass. Mia's expression shifted from surprise to annoyance. "Looks like Tom was right about curious locals," she sighed, heading for the front desk. "I'll handle this." Mike stayed with their patient, listening as Mia firmly but politely dealt with the late-night visitors. Her voice carried clearly through. The quiet clinic. No, they couldn't come in. Yes, the animal was receiving care. No, she couldn't discuss the details. When she returned, her face showed concern. "News is spreading faster than I expected. Mrs. Henderson from the diner was out there, and you know how she loves to talk. By morning, half the town will be speculating about what we've got here." Mike nodded, understanding the implications. Pine Ridge was a small town, and unusual events didn't stay secret for long. "Maybe we should get some professional guidance," he suggested. "I know some people from my service days who might have relevant experience with unusual cases." "I'm sending you the blood work results and tissue samples by courier," Mia explained, her voice thick from the long night of observation. "But I was hoping you might have some initial thoughts based on the visual evidence." Dr. Wilson stroked his grey beard thoughtfully, studying the creature through the video feed. "In 30 years of wildlife biology, I've never seen anything quite like this," he admitted. "The size alone is remarkable. You said approximately 140 pounds. He began taking rapid notes, his pen scratching audibly through the speakers. "The marking patterns and skull structure suggest something unusual." Mike, who had been quietly observing from nearby, stepped into view of the camera. "Dr. Wilson, Mike Sullivan here. During my military service in Central Asia, I encountered local legends about large wolf-like creatures in the high mountain regions. The descriptions..." He hesitated, aware of how it might sound. "They share some similarities with what we're seeing here." The biologist's interest visibly sharpened. "Mr. Sullivan, I'd very much like to hear more about those encounters. There have been some intriguing genetic studies recently about isolated canid populations in remote mountain ranges, the possibility of previously undocumented subspecies." Their discussion was interrupted by a commotion outside the clinic. Mia moved to the front window, pulling back the blinds to reveal a small crowd gathering in the parking lot. Word had spread quickly in the small town, and it seemed everyone in Pine Ridge was curious about their mysterious patient. "We're going to need some help managing this situation," Mia said, returning to the computer. Dr. Wilson nodded in agreement, already typing on his own keyboard. "I'm sending my research assistant, Dr. Emily Chen, to you immediately. She's an expert in canine genetics and behavior. In the meantime, limit access to the animal and document everything. Photos, videos, measurements, any data you can gather safely." After ending the call, Mia and Mike worked together to prepare for what promised to be a challenging day. The creature was showing remarkable improvement. Its vitals were stable, and the IV fluids had helped combat the dehydration. Even its injured leg seemed to be causing less distress, though X-rays would be needed to assess the full extent of the damage. "We need a plan," Mia said, watching through the window as more vehicles pulled into the clinic's lot. Once the regular appointments start arriving, she was interrupted by a knock at the back door. Tom Bishop had returned. this time accompanied by two officials from the State Wildlife Department. The wildlife officers, Jensen and Rodriguez, introduced themselves professionally, but their excitement was evident as they approached the isolation room. Officer Jensen pulled out a tablet, comparing something on his screen to the creature before them. "We've been tracking unusual sightings in this region for the past 6 months, he explained, showing them a map marked with various data points. "Nothing concrete until now, but the pattern suggests a small population moving through these mountains." Officer Rodriguez was already photographing their patient, particularly interested in the distinctive markings along its flanks. The creature watched the newcomers with that same unsettling intelligence, its ears moving to track each voice. When Officer Rodriguez approached the window for a closer photo, it lifted its head and met her gaze directly. The officer stepped back involuntarily, startled by the intensity of that eye contact. "The awareness level is remarkable," she said, checking her photos. "More like what you'd see in higher primates than typical canids." She turned to Mike. "You mentioned something about legends from Central Asia?" Before Mike could respond, Mia's phone buzzed with an urgent message. Jake, her son, was warning her that a local news van had just turned onto the clinic's street. "This is getting out of hand," she said, quickly pulling up the security camera feeds on her computer. The crowd in the parking lot had grown larger, and she could see more vehicles approaching. Tom Bishop took charge of the situation, stepping outside to establish some order. His authority as head ranger helped disperse the immediate crowd. But it was clear this was just the beginning of public interest in their unusual patient. Mike found himself drawn back to the isolation room, watching as the creature observed the activity around it. There was something about its behavior that nagged at his military-trained mind. The way it analyzed its surroundings, the calculated looks it gave each new person. It reminded him of intelligence briefings about highly adaptive predator species. Maya joined him, carrying fresh bandages for the injured leg. "Dr. Chen should arrive by evening," she said, entering the room carefully. "Until then, we need to minimize stress and continue monitoring recovery." As she approached the creature, it turned its massive head toward her, and for a moment, Mike saw something in its eyes. Not just intelligence, but something deeper, more ancient. The morning sun now fully illuminated the isolation room, highlighting details they hadn't noticed in the previous night's artificial lighting. The creature's fur showed complex color variations, with subtle patterns that seemed to shift with each movement. Its size became even more impressive in the natural light, the body mass and muscle structure suggesting power beyond anything seen in domestic dogs or typical wolves. Officer Jensen was carefully measuring the creature's paw prints on the padded floor of the isolation room, comparing them to known wolf and dog tracks in his reference materials. "The size and shape are unique," he reported, photographing his measurements. "The weight distribution and pad structure suggest adaptation to both rocky terrain and deep snow." A commotion from the front of the clinic drew their attention. Despite Tom's efforts, a persistent news reporter had managed to slip through to the back entrance. Mia quickly closed the isolation room's observation blinds while Mike moved to intercept the intruder. The reporter, a young woman clutching a microphone from the local station, managed to get out half a question about mysterious creature before Mike and Tom escorted her firmly but politely from the premises. But they all knew this was just the beginning. In the age of social media, keeping something like this quiet would be impossible. "We need to get those X-rays done now," Mia decided, checking the time, "before this situation gets any more complicated." She began preparing the portable X-ray equipment, knowing they would need detailed images to properly treat the injured. The wildlife officers offered to help, their experience with large predators proving valuable as they carefully positioned the creature for imaging. Despite its improving strength, it remained surprisingly cooperative, as if understanding the necessity of the procedure. As Mia processed the X-ray images, Mike kept watch by the isolation room door. The creature had settled back on its bed, but remained alert, those remarkable eyes fixed on the humans moving around its space. Every so often, its ears would swivel toward the distant sound of vehicles arriving at the clinic, and Mike could sense its growing awareness of the increasing activity around it. The X-rays would provide crucial information about the injury, but Mike suspected they were only the beginning of the revelations this creature would bring to their small Montana town. As he watched it track a passing shadow with predatory precision, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were dealing with something far more significant than anyone had yet realized. Mia held the X-rays up to the light, her eyes widening as she studied the skeletal structure revealed in the images. The creature's bone density and formation were unlike anything she'd seen in her years of veterinary practice. Mike and the wildlife officers gathered around, equally intrigued by what the films revealed. "Look at the skull formation," Mia pointed to the distinctive features. "The sagittal crest is far more pronounced than you'd see in any domestic dog breed, and even more developed than typical wolves. The jaw structure suggests tremendous bite force." She moved to another image, showing the injured leg. And here, the bone density and muscle attachment points indicate powerful running and jumping capabilities. Officer Rodriguez pulled out her tablet, quickly making notes. The skeletal proportions match some of the track measurements we've been documenting in the high country, but seeing the full structure, she shook her head in amazement. This suggests an apex predator adapted for harsh mountain environments. The creature stirred in its enclosure, drawing their attention. Its recovery continued to progress at a remarkable rate. The IV fluids and medications had helped stabilize its condition, and even the injured leg showed signs of improvement. Under the bright morning light, its unusual features became even more apparent. "The leg fracture is clean," Mia continued, examining the X-ray more closely. "With proper treatment and rest, it should heal well. But these bones..." She traced the unusual density patterns with her finger. "They show adaptations I've never encountered before." A sharp knock at the clinic's back door interrupted their discussion. Dr. Emily Chen had arrived earlier than expected, her rental car covered in road dust from the drive up from the university. The young geneticist's eyes lit up with professional excitement as she took in the scene before her. "Dr. Wilson sent me the preliminary photos," she said, already pulling equipment from her bags. But seeing it in person, she moved closer to the isolation room window, studying the creature with intense interest. The phenotypic expressions are extraordinary. Some features suggest connections to ancient canid lineages we've only seen in fossil records. The creature watched Dr. Chen with equal interest, its head tilted slightly as if evaluating this new observer. The geneticist's presence seemed to trigger something in its demeanor, a subtle shift in attention that didn't go unnoticed by Mike's trained eye. "I brought specialized testing equipment," Dr. Chen explained, setting up her portable lab station. "We can run more detailed genetic analyses right here." She carefully organized vials and testing materials, her movements precise and methodical. "The tissue samples you collected will be invaluable." Outside the clinic, the crowd had grown despite Tom's best efforts to maintain order. The local news van remained parked across the street, its crew attempting to get footage through the clinic's windows. Mia's phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters and curious colleagues from neighboring towns. "We need to control this narrative," Officer Jensen said, watching the growing crowd through the blinds. "Once word gets out about what we might be dealing with," he trailed off, but they all understood the implications. A discovery of this magnitude would attract attention far beyond their small Montana town. Dr. Chen worked efficiently at her mobile station, processing the samples Mia had collected. Her expression grew more animated as initial results began appearing on her laptop screen. "The genetic markers are fascinating," she reported, scrolling through data. "There are sequences here that don't match any known canid species in our database." Mike found himself thinking back to those mountain missions in Central Asia, remembering the local shepherds' tales of massive wolf-like creatures that moved through the high passes. At the time, he dismissed the stories as folklore, but now, the creature suddenly lifted its head, ears swiveling toward the window. Moments later, they all heard it, a distant howling from the mountains, carrying clearly through the cold morning air. The response was immediate and dramatic. The creature's entire demeanor changed, its powerful body tensing as it listened to the calls. "Quick! Record this," Dr. Chen urged, fumbling for her equipment. The creature's reaction to the howls was unlike anything they'd seen in domestic dogs or wolves. Its muscles rippled beneath the thick fur as it attempted to rise, despite the injured leg. Maya moved quickly to prevent the patient from hurting itself further, but stopped short when the creature let out a sound that made everyone in the room freeze. It wasn't a bark or a typical howl. The vocalization was deeper, more complex, carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in their bones. "That's not a normal canid vocalization," Dr. Chen said quietly, her recording equipment capturing every sound. The frequency pattern and complexity. She was already analyzing the sound waves on her laptop, her excitement barely contained. The sun climbed higher in the Montana sky as they worked to document and understand their extraordinary patient. Dr. Chen's tests revealed more surprises with each passing hour. Genetic markers that suggested an ancient lineage, adaptations that spoke of evolution in extreme environments, and capabilities that defied conventional understanding of canid species. "We need to contact the International Cryptozoology Institute," Dr. Chen announced, looking up from her latest results. "These findings, they could revolutionize our understanding of surviving prehistoric species." She began composing an email to her colleagues, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Mike watched the creature through the observation window, noting how it tracked every movement and conversation with unsettling awareness. Those eyes held something he'd seen before, in the oldest, wildest parts of the world, where nature still kept secrets from human understanding. Mia's son, Jake, arrived with lunch for everyone, his teenage curiosity evident as he tried to peek into the isolation room. "Mom, the whole town's talking about this," he reported, setting down bags of sandwiches. "There are all kinds of rumors going around. Some people are saying it's some kind of prehistoric wolf. Others think it's an escaped government experiment." The adults exchanged glances, knowing the truth might be even more extraordinary than the rumors. Dr. Chen's preliminary genetic analysis suggested they were dealing with something that challenged their understanding of canid evolution. A creature that perhaps represented a living link to species long thought extinct. Officer Rodriguez's radio crackled with updates from other ranger stations. Similar tracks had been found in remote areas of the mountain range, and motion sensor cameras had captured grainy nighttime images of large wolf-like creatures moving through the high country. The evidence suggested their patient wasn't alone. There might be an entire population living in the most isolated regions of the mountains. The implications were staggering. If a previously unknown large predator species had managed to survive in these mountains, what did that mean for wildlife management, for our understanding of evolution, for the very way we thought about wilderness and its capacity to harbor secrets? The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the clinic windows as Dr. Chen reviewed another set of test results, her excitement growing with each new data point. The creature had been dozing lightly, but opened its eyes immediately when she gasped, drawing everyone's attention to her computer screen. "These genetic markers," she said, pointing to complex sequences of data, "they're showing similarities to ancient canid species we've only seen in fossil records. The DNA structure suggests a lineage that may have diverged from modern wolves hundreds of thousands of years ago. Mia and Mike moved closer to examine the screen, though the technical details meant little to them. What they could understand was the tremor of discovery in Dr. Chen's voice, the way her hands shook slightly as she pulled up comparison charts. "Look at these sequences," she continued, highlighting specific sections. "They show adaptations for high-altitude survival, enhanced muscle density, and advanced cognitive development. Some of these genetic patterns, they're completely unknown to science." The creature watched their excitement with those unnervingly intelligent eyes, its massive head tilted slightly as if following their discussion. Its recovery continued to progress at a remarkable rate. The injured leg, though still immobilized, showed signs of accelerated healing that surprised even Maya. Officer Rodriguez returned from her patrol of the clinic's perimeter, shaking her head at the growing crowd outside. "The situation's getting complicated," she reported. "We've got news crews from 3 different stations setting up, and someone from National Geographic just called the station asking for details." "That's not our biggest concern," Officer Jensen added, hanging up his phone. "I just got word from headquarters. The federal government's showing interest. They're sending a special team to assess the situation." The way he emphasized those last words made everyone pause. Mike's military experience kicked in, recognizing the implications. "What kind of team?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Jensen's expression confirmed his fears. "Some kind of specialized research unit. They're being very vague about the details, but they're claiming jurisdiction under rare species protection laws." He checked his phone again. "They'll be here by tomorrow morning." Dr. Chen looked up from her computer, her face showing concern. "We need to document everything before they arrive. These findings are too important to risk being classified and hidden away." She began rapidly backing up her data to multiple devices. Maya moved to check. On their patient, her hands gentle as she examined the healing wounds. The creature's temperature had normalized, and its vital signs were strong. As she worked, she noticed something remarkable about the injury sites. "The tissue regeneration rate is extraordinary," she reported, carefully photographing the healing. "A progress. I've never seen anything like it. The wounds that should have taken weeks to heal are showing advanced recovery in just days." Mike watched through the observation window as Mia completed her examination. Something about the creature's behavior had shifted. There was a new alertness in its posture, as if it sensed the changing situation. Those ancient eyes seemed to hold knowledge beyond their understanding. The clinic's back door opened again, admitting Tom Bishop with several large maps of the mountain range. He spread them across the reception desk, pointing to marked locations. "We've been correlating reported sightings over the past 6 months," he explained, indicating clusters of pins. "There's a pattern emerging. These creatures, and I'm certain now there are more, they're using the most remote parts of the range, areas so rugged we barely patrol them." Dr. Chen joined them at the maps, her scientific mind already analyzing the implications. "The terrain would explain some of the genetic adaptations we're seeing. These areas are perfect for an apex predator to remain hidden from human contact." The creature suddenly raised its head, ears swiveling toward the window. They all fell silent, listening. In the distance, barely audible above the murmur of the crowd outside, came that haunting howl again. This time, multiple voices joined. "In the chorus, they're getting closer," Tom said quietly, marking the approximate direction on his map. "Whatever these things are, they're moving toward us." The creature's response was immediate, its powerful muscles tensed, and that same otherworldly vocalization emerged from its throat. Dr. Chen's recording equipment captured the sound, her computer displaying complex waveform patterns. The vocalization contains frequencies outside normal canid ranges, she explained, studying the data. The communication potential is far more sophisticated than anything we've documented in known species. Mia's son, Jake, burst into the clinic, his teenage enthusiasm barely contained. "Mum, you need to see this." He pulled up a video on his phone, shaky footage from a hiker's trail camera dated just 2 days ago. The grainy nighttime images showed several large wolf-like forms moving through deep snow, their size and movements matching their patient's characteristics. "It's already going viral," Jake reported, scrolling through social media responses. People are comparing it to legends from all over the world, ancient wolf gods, prehistoric survivors, all kinds of theories. The afternoon wore on, bringing more revelations with each new test result. Dr. Chen's genetic analysis continued to uncover unprecedented features, markers for enhanced intelligence, extreme environmental adaptation, and characteristics that defied current understanding of canid evolution. Officers Jensen and Rodriguez coordinated with other ranger stations, establishing a perimeter around the reported sighting areas. The creature's pack was clearly moving through the region, but their behavior patterns suggested intelligence and deliberate avoidance of human contact. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the clinic floor, Mike found himself alone with their extraordinary patient. The creature met his gaze with that same ancient wisdom, and for a moment he felt a connection to something primal and powerful, a living link to a time when the world held more mysteries than humans could comprehend. Maya returned from a brief rest break to find Mike lost in thought by the observation window. "Oh, what are you thinking?" she asked softly, noting the troubled expression on his face. "I'm thinking about what happens when that federal team arrives," he replied, watching the creature shift position in its enclosure. "This discovery, it's bigger than us, bigger than this small town, but something tells me we have a responsibility to protect it." The creature's ears twitched at his words, its gaze shifting between them with unsettling comprehension. Outside, the mountain winds carried another chorus of distant howls, and in the growing darkness, their patient's eyes seemed to glow with an inner light that spoke of secrets yet to be revealed. The evening shadows lengthened across the clinic floor as Dr. Chen's laptop chimed with an incoming video call from the International Cryptozoology Institute. The creature lifted its head with interest as 3 distinguished scientists appeared on the screen, their faces showing barely contained excitement as Dr. Chen shared her latest findings. "The genetic sequencing is unprecedented," Dr. Chen explained, sharing her screen to show detailed DNA analysis. "We're seeing markers that suggest this species may have evolved in isolation for hundreds of thousands of years, preserving traits from an ancient canid lineage we thought long extinct." The scientists leaned forward in their respective frames, studying the data with intense focus. Dr. Ramirez, a leading expert in evolutionary biology, spoke first. "The adaptations you're documenting, they challenge everything we thought we knew about canid evolution. This could rewrite our understanding of how these species survived the last ice age." As they discussed the implications of the discovery, Mike noticed a subtle change in their patient's behavior. The creature had begun tracking movement outside the clinic with increased attention, its powerful muscles tensing beneath the thick fur. Something in its posture reminded him of military working dogs when they sensed approaching threats. Mia picked up on the change too, moving closer to the observation window. "Something's making it nervous," she whispered, watching as the creature's ears swiveled toward sounds they couldn't hear. The monitoring equipment showed elevated heart rate and respiratory patterns. Tom Bishop burst through the back door, his face grave. "We've got company coming," he announced, slightly out of breath. "Just got word from my contact at the regional office. That federal team, they're not just researchers. There's a military component." Mike's jaw tightened as memories from his service days surfaced. "Special Projects Division?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Tom nodded grimly. 3. Black SUVs just passed through Chester Point, heading our way. They'll be here within the hour. He spread out a fresh map on the desk. And that's not all. We're getting reports of movement in the high country. Multiple large forms moving through the tree line, all heading in this direction. Dr. Chen quickly wrapped up her video call, promising to send secure copies of her data to the Institute. We need to protect this information, she said, frantically backing up files to encrypted drives. This discovery belongs to science, to our understanding of natural history. It can't disappear into some classified file. The creature had risen to its full height now, showing no sign of its recent injury. Its presence filled the isolation room with barely contained power, those ancient eyes fixed on the gathering darkness outside. The distant howls were getting closer, more frequent, carrying complex harmonics that made the windows vibrate. Mia checked the security cameras, counting. At least a dozen news vehicles parked along the street. The whole world is watching, she said quietly. Whatever happens next, it won't be easy to cover up. Officer Rodriguez's radio crackled with urgent updates from patrols in the high country. Multiple contacts moving down the ridgeline. A ranger reported, his voice tight with excitement. Biggest tracks we've ever seen. They're definitely coming this way. Mike found himself calculating distances, escape routes, alternatives, his military training kicking in as he assessed their options. The creature watched him intently, as if understanding the gravity of the moment. Its posture had changed, becoming more alert, more purposeful. We need to make a decision, he said finally, turning to face the others. That federal team, I've seen how these situations play out. Once they take control, this incredible discovery could disappear forever. Everything Dr. Chen has documented, everything we've learned about these amazing creatures, it could all be classified and hidden away. Dr. Chen nodded vigorously, clutching her laptop. The scientific implications are staggering. This species could provide insights into evolution, adaptation, cognition. We're just beginning to understand its significance. Mia moved to check the creature's injured leg one last time, but stopped short. The healing rate had been remarkable throughout, but what she saw now defied medical explanation. The fracture site showed almost complete recovery, the tissue regeneration far beyond normal parameters. Look at this, she called the others over. The creature allowed her to examine the leg, its muscular frame dwarfing her as she worked. The healing rate? It's impossible. No known species can regenerate tissue this quickly. A deep rumble of thunder rolled across the mountains, but the sound that followed wasn't weather-related. A chorus of howls echoed through the valley, closer than ever before. Their patient responded, its powerful vocalization rattling equipment in the room. The complex harmonics carried meaning none of them could understand, but they felt it in their bones. Officer Jensen burst in from his perimeter check. Those federal SUVs just turned onto Pine Street, 5 minutes out, tops. He paused, listening to the approaching howls. And whatever's coming down from the mountains, they're almost here. Mike made a decision then, one that went against his military training but felt undeniably right. Mia, how stable is our patient? Could it survive on its own now? Mia looked at the creature, seeing strength and vitality where days ago there had been weakness. The recovery is remarkable. Medically speaking, there's no reason to keep it confined. Dr. Chen, is your data secured? Mike asked. The geneticist patted her laptop bag, nodding firmly. Multiple backups, all encrypted. The Institute has copies too. Whatever happens, the scientific record is preserved. The creature's behavior had become more urgent now, its powerful form moving restlessly in the confined space, those intelligent eyes fixed on Mike with an intensity that spoke of understanding far beyond their comprehension. Tom, Mike turned to the ranger, what's the fastest route to the high country from here? Away from the main roads, Tom didn't hesitate, pointing to his map. There's an old fire road behind the clinic, leads straight up to the ridgeline. No patrol coverage up there tonight. All units are focused on the incoming activity. The sound of approaching vehicles cut through the night, headlights sweeping across the clinic windows. At the same moment, movement in the tree line caught their attention. Massive shapes emerging from the darkness, their forms both familiar and alien in the dim light. Mike looked at each person in the room, seeing the same understanding in their eyes. What they'd discovered here was bigger than protocols, bigger than government agencies, bigger than their small Montana town. It was a glimpse into nature's deepest mysteries, a living link to Earth's ancient past. The creature stood at its full height now, power radiating from every line of its frame. Those eyes, holding wisdom from ages past, met Mike's gaze one last time. In that moment, he knew they were all part of something extraordinary, a brief intersection between human knowledge and wild mysteries that defied explanation. Outside, tires crunched on gravel as the federal vehicles pulled up. But from the mountains came another sound, a chorus of ancient voices calling to their own, a reminder that some secrets of the natural world were never meant to be contained or controlled by human hands. Mike moved with decisive purpose, his military training evident in every motion. Mia, turn off all the exterior lights. Tom, show me exactly where that fire road connects to the back of the property. The sound of car doors slamming echoed from the front of the clinic as the federal team arrived. Dr. Chen, start wiping the local security footage, he continued, his voice low but firm. Keep your data secure, but we need to remove any visual evidence of what's about to happen. The geneticist nodded, her fingers flying across her keyboard. As she protected their discovery while erasing their tracks, Maya quickly dimmed the lights, leaving only the soft glow of emergency fixtures. Through the observation window, their extraordinary patient stood alert, its massive form seeming to fill the isolation room with ancient power. The creature's eyes reflected the dim light with an almost ethereal quality, focused intently on the back door that Tom was quietly unlocking. Officer Rodriguez's radio crackled with urgent updates. Multiple large forms moving through the tree line, a ranger reported, his voice tight with tension. They're approaching the clinic from the North Ridge. Jensen consulted Tom's map, marking the reported positions. At least 6 distinct individuals, he noted, studying the pattern. They're moving with purpose, coordinating their approach. His years of wildlife experience showed in his furrowed brow. This isn't random movement. They're coming for their pack member. The sound of authoritative voices filled the front of the clinic as the federal team made their entrance. Dr. Chen quickly closed her laptop, securing it in her bag. "Data's safe," she whispered. "Security footage is cleared, but I've preserved all the scientific documentation." Mike could hear heavy boots approaching down the hallway. They had moments at most. He turned to Maya, his expression grave but determined. "It's your clinic, your call. But whatever we decide, it needs to be now." Mia looked at their patient, remembering the injured creature they'd found days ago, seeing now the magnificent being it had revealed itself to be. Her decision was instant and unwavering. Do it. With practiced efficiency, Mike began disconnecting, monitoring equipment while Maya removed the last of the medical devices. The creature remained perfectly still, allowing their ministrations with an awareness that seemed almost collaborative. A sharp knock at the clinic's front desk echoed through the building. "Federal Wildlife Management Unit," a commanding voice announced. "We have jurisdiction over the reported specimen. All civilian personnel are ordered to stand down." Tom had the back door open now, the cold Montana night air rushing in with the scent of pine and snow. Beyond the door, barely visible in the darkness, the old fire road wound up toward the ridgeline, where multiple pairs of eyes now gleamed in the darkness, ready. Mike asked quietly, reaching for the isolation room door. The others nodded, positioning themselves to block any view from the hallway. With careful movements, he opened the enclosure. The creature stepped out with fluid. Grace, its recovered leg showing no sign of the injury that had brought it to them. Its size was even more impressive now as it moved freely, power rippling through every motion. Those intelligent eyes swept across each of their faces, conveying something that felt remarkably like gratitude. Heavy footsteps approached the treatment area. "Dr. Martinez?" The federal agent's voice was closer now. "We need to discuss your recent patient." The creature's head turned toward the sound, then back to the open door. Without a sound, it moved through the doorway into the night air. Its form seemed to shift in the darkness, blending with the shadows as naturally as breathing. A chorus of howls erupted from the ridgeline, not the mournful sounds of typical wolves, but complex vocalizations that resonated with harmonics they could feel in their bones. Their former patient responded, its voice joining the ancient chorus as it moved with incredible speed toward its waiting pack. "Dr. Martinez!" The agent's voice was insistent now. Mia quickly closed the back door, composing herself as she turned to face the federal team. 5 men in tactical gear filed into the treatment area, led by a stern-faced agent in a dark suit. "Agent Phillips, Federal Wildlife Management," he announced, showing credentials. "We're here about the reported unusual canid specimen." His eyes scanned the room, finding only empty medical equipment and standard clinic supplies. Maya stepped forward, her professional demeanor perfect. "I'm Dr. Martinez. How can I help you?" Behind her, Mike and the others arranged themselves casually, their faces revealing nothing. Agent Phillips consulted his tablet. "We have multiple reports of an unidentified large canid being treated at this facility. We need to examine the specimen immediately." "Oh, the injured shepherd mix." Mia's voice was calm, confusion just the right note in her tone. "I'm afraid you've had a wasted trip. The owner collected it about an hour ago." The agent's eyes narrowed. "Owner?" His team was already spreading through the clinic, checking rooms with practiced efficiency. "Yes, a local rancher," Tom added smoothly. "Big dog, probably some wolf hybrid in its breeding. Caused quite a stir in town. You know how people love to speculate." Dr. Chen held up her testing equipment. "I'm from the University Biology Department. Came to check for potential hybrid genetics, but it was just an unusually large mixed breed. All very ordinary, I'm afraid." A subordinate agent returned from checking the isolation room. "Sir, the enclosure's empty. No sign of the specimen." Another reported similar findings from the surgery suite. Agent Phillips studied their faces intently, years of experience telling him something wasn't adding up. But before he could press further, new sounds filled the night, howls unlike anything any of them had ever heard, echoing from multiple directions in the mountains above Pine Ridge. The federal team rushed to the windows, watching as massive shapes moved through the darkness along the ridgeline. The forms were visible for just moments before disappearing into the wilderness, leaving only their haunting calls echoing through the valley. "Sir?" one of the tactical team members called urgently. "Multiple contacts moving away from the area. At high speed. Request permission to pursue." Agent Phillips stood at the window, watching as the last of the shapes vanished into the night. His jaw tightened as he looked back at the clinic staff, knowing something extraordinary had slipped through his fingers, but unable to prove anything. "Stand down," he ordered finally. "Whatever was here, it's gone now." He turned to Mia, his expression professional but frustrated. "We'll need copies of all your records regarding the animal you treated." Mia gestured to her standard medical files. "Of course, though I'm afraid you'll find it's all rather mundane. Just basic treatment for an injured dog." As the federal team began their futile documentation, Mike moved to the back window. In the distance, he could just make out movement along the highest ridges, powerful forms running free in their true element. The creature they'd helped had rejoined its kind, returning to the wild places where ancient mysteries still roamed. Dr. Chen stood beside him, her encrypted data secure in her bag. "They'll never find them up there," she said softly. "Some things aren't meant to be captured and studied. Sometimes witnessing the mystery is enough." The mountain winds carried one final chorus of howls, complex, haunting vocalizations that spoke of secrets older than human civilization. Their patient's voice was among them, strong and wild, carrying messages they could feel but never truly understand. The following week passed in a blur of activity at the Pine Ridge Veterinary Clinic. Mia maintained her usual schedule of appointments, treating the town's cats, dogs, and occasional farm animals with professional efficiency. But everyone who worked there felt the absence of their extraordinary patient. The empty isolation room, a reminder of what they'd briefly witnessed. The federal team remained in town for 3 days, conducting interviews and searching the surrounding wilderness. Their high-tech equipment and tracking expertise proved useless against the creature's ability to vanish into the most remote parts of the mountain range. Agent Phillips made daily appearances at the clinic, his frustration growing as each new lead turned into another dead end. Dr. Chen had returned to the university, but her encrypted data was already making waves in the scientific community. The genetic analysis, carefully anonymized and stripped of identifying details, suggested the existence of an unknown canid species that challenged current evolutionary theories. Her preliminary paper, submitted to a prestigious biology journal, sparked intense debate among experts worldwide. Mike found himself drawn back to the mountains, spending long hours hiking the high trails. He told himself he was just enjoying the solitude, but his eyes constantly searched the wilderness for signs of their remarkable visitor. The tracking skills he'd honed in the military now served a different purpose as he documented subtle signs of large predator activity in the most remote areas. "Found some interesting tracks up by Eagle's Ridge," Tom Bishop reported one morning, spreading photographs across Mia's desk. "Bigger than anything we've officially recorded in these mountains. And look at this pattern. The stride length suggests something moving faster than any known wolf." Mia studied the images while completing her morning paperwork. The federal agents had finally given up their daily visits, but she knew they were, still monitoring the clinic. "The ranchers are reporting fewer missing livestock," she noted. "Whatever's up there, it's staying away from human areas." Officer Rodriguez stopped by regularly with updates from the Wildlife Department's motion sensor. Cameras. Most showed only tantalizing glimpses. Massive shadows moving through nighttime forest, eyes reflecting camera flashes with unusual colors. But one image, captured on a remote camera near the Continental Divide, showed something more. "Look at this," she said, pulling up the photo on her tablet. The image quality was poor, typical of nighttime wildlife photography, but it clearly showed a group of large canids moving through deep snow. Their size was evident against the surrounding trees, and their features, though blurred, matched what they remembered of their patient. "That's them," Mike said quietly, studying the image. The lead animal's stance was hauntingly familiar. The same powerful build, the same distinctive head shape. They're staying high in the backcountry using terrain that's almost impossible for humans to access. Dr. Chen called regularly with updates on her research. The genetic samples had revealed more surprises with each analysis. "The DNA shows adaptations we've never seen before," she explained during one video call. "Enhanced night vision, extreme cold tolerance, advanced neural development suggesting intelligence far beyond normal canid levels. But the most interesting thing is the age of the lineage." She shared her screen, showing complex genetic charts. "These markers suggest the species diverged from other canids hundreds of thousands of years ago. They may represent a separate evolutionary line that survived the last ice age in isolated mountain refugees. The implications for our understanding of species survival and adaptation are revolutionary. The town of Pine Ridge gradually returned to its normal rhythm, though the events at the clinic had left their mark. Local folk artists produced paintings and sculptures of wolf-like creatures with ancient eyes, and the diner offered a new mountain mystery breakfast special. Mrs. Henderson still stopped by the clinic regularly, hoping for gossip about their unusual patient, but even she eventually accepted that some stories had to remain untold. Maya's son Jake maintained a careful online presence, monitoring social media for any new sightings or discussions about large predators in the mountains. Most posts were clearly hoaxes or misidentified regular wolves, but occasionally something more interesting appeared. "Check this out," he said one evening, showing his mother a video on his phone. The shaky footage, taken by a backcountry skier, showed distant forms moving across a snowy ridge at impossible speeds. The creature's size and fluid movement matched their memories perfectly. Mike spent more time with Tom, helping the ranger monitor the most remote parts of his territory. They never directly searched for the creatures, respecting their need for privacy, but they documented signs of their presence, unusual tracks, complex vocalizations recorded on audio equipment, patterns of movement that spoke of intelligence and purpose. "They've always been here," Tom mused during one high country patrol. All those old stories about giant wolves in the mountains, the local legends about ancient creatures, we just weren't seeing what was right in front of us. The scientific community continued to debate Dr. Chen's findings, but without access to the actual specimens, no firm conclusions could be drawn. Her career flourished as she published careful analyses of the genetic data, always protecting the source and location of her samples. Late one evening, as Mia was finishing up at the clinic, she heard it, a distant chorus of howls from the high country. The complex harmonics were unmistakable, carrying messages in frequencies that made the windows vibrate slightly. She stepped outside, letting the mountain air carry the sound to her. Mike's truck pulled into the parking lot as the howls faded. He developed a habit of stopping by the clinic on nights like this, when the creatures' voices echoed down from their mountain domain. They stood together in comfortable silence, listening to the last notes die away. "No regrets?" he asked quietly, knowing Mia had risked her professional reputation and possibly her license by letting their patient return to the wild. She shook her head, smiling. "Some things aren't meant to be captured or controlled. We were privileged to witness something extraordinary, to help preserve a mystery that's managed to survive alongside us without being discovered." The mountains loomed dark against the star-filled sky, their highest reaches still untouched by human development. Somewhere in those remote peaks, their patient ran free with its pack, maintaining a way of life that had endured for countless generations. Dr. Chen's research would eventually lead to better protection for the region's wilderness areas, though few understood the real reason behind the new conservation measures. Tom and his rangers maintained a careful buffer zone around the most remote territories, quietly discouraging too much human intrusion into the creature's domain. The federal agents occasionally returned for follow-up investigations, but found nothing beyond local legends and unclear photographs. Agent Phillips made one final visit to the clinic, his frustration evident as he closed the official file on the case. "You know what really happened here," he said to Mia, standing in the now empty isolation room. "Something extraordinary was in this room, something that would have changed our understanding of the natural world." Mia met his gaze calmly. "Sometimes the greatest service we can do for nature is to let it keep its secrets," she replied. The agent studied her face for a long moment before nodding slightly and walking away. That night, as the autumn wind carried another chorus of ancient voices down from the high country, Mike and Mia sat in the clinic's break room, sharing coffee and memories of their brief encounter with something remarkable. The creature they'd helped had given them more than just a glimpse into natural mysteries. It had reminded them that the world was still capable of surprising those who paid attention. "They're still out there," Mike said softly, listening to the distant howls. "Still running free, still keeping their secrets." Mia nodded, understanding that some mysteries were meant to remain just that. Mysteries that reminded humans of their place in a world still full of wonders. The mountains kept their secrets, and in the highest, wildest places, extraordinary creatures continued their ancient ways, their existence known only to a few who had learned the value of protecting nature's mysteries. 6 months later, the early spring snow fell softly on the mountains surrounding Pine Ridge, covering the town in a fresh blanket of white. Mike Sullivan stood at his cabin window, watching the flakes swirl in the pre-dawn light. His morning routine had changed since their extraordinary encounter. He now spent the quiet hours logging weather patterns and unusual activity in the high country. Maya's clinic had settled back into its normal rhythm, though subtle changes remained. The isolation room had been converted into a standard treatment area, but they'd kept some of the specialized equipment just in case. The security cameras Tom had installed still monitored the surrounding wilderness, their footage regularly, checked for signs of their mysterious friends. Dr. Chen's research had gained significant attention in the scientific community. Her papers on previously unknown canid genetic adaptations sparked intense debate among evolutionary biologists. Without revealing the source of her data, she had managed to challenge existing theories about species survival and adaptation in extreme environments. "Look at these new thermal imaging scans," Tom said one morning, spreading photographs across Mike's kitchen table. The ranger had stopped by on his way to patrol, bringing fresh evidence of activity in the high country. The infrared images showed heat signatures of massive forms moving through deep snow at elevations where no known predators should survive. "They're expanding their territory," Tom explained, pointing to locations on his well-worn map, "but staying smart about it, using only the most remote areas, avoiding any regular human contact. These creatures have survived this long by knowing how to stay hidden." Mike studied the images, recognizing patterns that matched his military training in tracking large predators. The creatures moved with purpose and intelligence, using terrain features to remain concealed while covering remarkable distances. Their behavior suggested not just survival instinct, but sophisticated strategy. Maya's son Jake had become the unofficial curator of local sightings, maintaining a private database of verified reports and unusual photographs. Most turned out to be regular wolves or tricks of light and shadow, but occasionally something more interesting appeared. "This came in last week," Jake said, showing Mike his laptop during one of their regular review sessions. The video, taken by a wildlife photographer near the Continental Divide, showed a brief glimpse of something moving through a distant snowfield. The creature's size and fluid movement were hauntingly familiar. Officer Rodriguez continued her official, monitoring duties, though her reports carefully understated what she actually observed. "The high country is active," she told Mike during a chance meeting at the local diner. "More tracks, more vocalizations, but nothing that would attract unwanted attention." The federal authorities had officially closed their investigation, filing it away as another unresolved wildlife case. Agent Phillips made one final trip to Pine Ridge, more out of personal curiosity than professional duty. He found Mike at the diner, nursing his morning coffee. "You know," the agent said, sliding into the opposite booth, "I've spent 20 years investigating unusual wildlife reports. Most turn out to be hoaxes or misidentified known species." He stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "But sometimes, we find something that reminds us how little we really know about the natural world. Mike met his gaze steadily, neither confirming nor denying anything. The agent nodded slightly, understanding the silence. "The mountains are big," he continued. "Lots of remote places where something could survive unchanged for a very long time. Places where old secrets could stay hidden." Dr. Chen's latest research focused on the evolutionary advantages of intelligence in apex predators. Her careful analysis of the genetic markers she documented suggested cognitive capabilities far beyond current understanding of canid development. The academic debates her work sparked helped ensure the preservation of large wilderness areas, though few knew the real reason why. Maya had noticed changes in the local wildlife patterns. The usual predator-prey relationships had shifted slightly, adapting to the presence of something larger and more intelligent in the ecosystem. Rather than disrupting the natural balance, the creatures seemed to enhance it, culling the weak while avoiding conflict with human interests. The town of Pine Ridge had absorbed the mystery into its identity. Local artists incorporated subtle references to large wolf-like creatures in their work. The high school sports teams changed their logo to include ancient-looking canid eyes. Tourists occasionally came looking for the mountain monsters, but the locals had learned to shrug and change the subject. One crisp spring morning, Mike was checking his trail cameras when he found fresh tracks in the new snow. The prints were massive, showing the distinctive pattern they documented during their brief encounter. He followed them carefully, his tracking skills telling him they were only hours old. The trail led higher into the mountains, where the air grew thin and the snow deeper. Mike moved cautiously, respecting the territory he was entering. Near the tree line, he found what he was looking for, a clear view of the high ridge where the tracks led. There, standing against the sky, was a sight that made his breath catch. Their former patient, now fully recovered and magnificent in its freedom, stood watching him. The creature's size and power were even more impressive in its natural setting. Behind it, partially concealed by rocks and snow, more shapes moved, the pack that had come to reclaim their member. The creature's eyes met his across the distance, showing the same ancient intelligence they'd witnessed in the clinic. For a long moment they regarded each other, man and mystery, briefly connected across the divide between known and unknown. Then with fluid grace, the creature turned and vanished into the wilderness with its pack. Mike shared the encounter with Mia that evening at the clinic. She listened intently, understanding the significance of what he'd seen. "They're letting us know they're still here," she said softly. "Still free, still surviving the way they have for thousands of years." That night, as they sat in the clinic's break room, a familiar sound echoed down from the high country. The complex harmonics of the creature's vocalizations carried through the spring air, a reminder of the extraordinary encounter that had changed their understanding of the natural world. Tom's latest reports showed increasing signs of the creature's presence in the most remote areas, but always careful, always hidden. They had adapted to the modern world by staying in the shadows, using their intelligence and ancient knowledge to preserve their freedom. Dr. Chen's research had expanded to include studies of other potential cryptid species, though nothing matched the remarkable genetic markers she documented in Pine Ridge. Her work helped establish new protocols for wildlife conservation, emphasizing the protection of remote habitats where unknown species might still survive. The mountains kept their secrets, but now a select few knew what lived in the highest, wildest places. They had been privileged to witness something extraordinary, to help preserve a mystery that had survived alongside humanity without being discovered or understood. As spring slowly turned to summer, the creatures continued their ancient ways. In the remote peaks above Pine Ridge, their howls sometimes echoed through the valleys on quiet nights, reminding those who knew of nature's enduring mysteries. They remained free, wild, and undiscovered by a world too busy to notice the wonders still hiding in plain sight. 1 year after their extraordinary encounter, Mike Sullivan stood at his cabin door, watching a summer storm roll over the mountains. Lightning flickered between dark clouds, briefly illuminating the high ridges where their remarkable patient now roamed free with its pack. The rhythmic drumming of rain on the roof brought back memories of that life-changing night at the clinic. Maya's recent additions to her veterinary practice reflected subtle lessons learned from their experience. New monitoring equipment, carefully chosen for its ability to handle larger patients, stood ready in the upgraded treatment rooms. The isolation area, though rarely used, maintained specialized features that only a few understood the true purpose of. Dr. Chen's latest research paper had just been published in a prestigious scientific journal. Without revealing their source, her analysis of the genetic data continued to reshape understanding of canid evolution. Her careful documentation of advanced adaptations and unexpected cognitive markers sparked heated debates in academic circles. The high country's been active. Lately, Tom reported during his weekly visit to Mike's cabin, the ranger spread out his latest surveillance photos, showing unusual tracks and signs of large predator movement through remote areas. They're smart about it, though, staying well above the normal patrol routes, using terrain features that make tracking almost impossible. Jake's database of verified sightings had grown more sophisticated over the past year. The teenager had developed a careful system for filtering out hoaxes and misidentified conventional wildlife. "Check this out," he said, showing Mike a new entry. The thermal imaging footage captured by a high-altitude research drone showed heat signatures of multiple large forms moving with coordinated precision through steep terrain. Officer Rodriguez maintained her official duties while quietly supporting their efforts to protect the creature's privacy. Her regular reports noted increased wildlife activity in the high country, but carefully avoided details that might attract unwanted attention. "The ecosystem's actually healthier," she observed during one patrol. "These beings, whatever they're having a positive impact on the natural balance." Mia's professional reputation had grown following their encounter, though not for the reasons most assumed. Her careful handling of the unusual case, maintaining patient confidentiality despite intense public interest, earned respect from colleagues across the region. Other veterinarians now sought her advice on difficult cases, trusting her judgment and discretion. The town of Pine Ridge had incorporated the mystery into its character in subtle ways. Local artists captured the essence of their hidden neighbors in abstract sculptures and misty landscape paintings. The renovation of the town hall included decorative elements featuring stylized ancient canids. Even the annual mountain festival now included careful references to the region's unique wildlife heritage. Mike's military experience found new purpose in helping protect the creature's privacy. His training in counter-surveillance proved invaluable. As tourism increased, drawn by rumors of mysterious predators in the high country, he worked quietly with Tom to establish buffer zones around known pack territories, using natural barriers and careful misinformation to keep curious visitors away from sensitive areas. Dr. Chen's genetic research had expanded into new territories, though nothing matched the remarkable markers she documented in Pine Ridge. Her work influenced conservation policies worldwide, emphasizing the protection of remote habitats where unknown species might still survive. She maintained regular contact with Mia and Mike, sharing encrypted updates on her findings while carefully guarding their secret. The federal wildlife authorities had officially archived their investigation, but occasional inquiries still surfaced. Agent Phillips, now promoted to a desk job in Washington, sometimes called with carefully worded questions about unusual wildlife activity in the region. His official reports remained vague, suggesting he too had chosen to protect the mystery. One clear summer evening, as Mike checked his trail cameras near the tree line, he found fresh evidence of their hidden neighbors. The tracks showed the distinctive pattern they'd come to recognize, massive paw prints that spoke of size and power beyond conventional understanding. Following the signs with practiced care, he reached a high overlook just as the sun began to set. Movement caught. His eye on a distant ridge. Several large forms moved with fluid grace through the alpine meadow, their size evident even at this distance. Among them, he recognized their former patient by its distinctive markings and powerful stride. The creature paused, raising its head to scan the surroundings. Even from afar, those remarkable eyes seemed to find him. For a moment, time seemed to stop as they acknowledged each other across the distance. The creature's pose spoke of strength and freedom, of ancient wisdom carried forward into the modern world. Then, with characteristic deliberation, it led its pack away into the gathering dusk, disappearing into territories that remained wild and mysterious. Maya understood the significance of these occasional sightings when Mike shared them during their evening conversations at the clinic. "They're maintaining contact on their terms," she observed, "letting us know they're still here, still thriving, but keeping their distance from the human world." The creature's influence on the local ecosystem had become more apparent over time. Wildlife surveys showed healthier populations of prey species, better balanced and more resilient. The presence of these intelligent predators seemed to enhance rather than disrupt natural patterns, suggesting an ancient role in mountain ecology that science was only beginning to understand. Tom's latest mapping project revealed fascinating patterns in the creature's movements. They used the landscape with remarkable sophistication, exploiting terrain features and weather conditions to remain hidden while covering vast territories. Their intelligence showed in every aspect of their behavior, from hunting strategies to den site selection. Dr. Chen's ongoing analysis of their genetic data revealed more surprises. The creature's DNA suggested adaptations not just for survival, but for sophisticated social cooperation and problem-solving. Their cognitive capabilities, as indicated by neural development markers, hinted at intelligence that challenged conventional understanding of non-human consciousness. The mountains themselves seemed different now to those who knew their secret. The highest peaks held new mystery, the deepest valleys new wonder. Every storm that swept across the ridges, every mist that filled the canyons might conceal the movement of beings that had survived unchanged since Ice Age times. Late one night, as Mike and Mia finished updating their private records of creature activity, a familiar sound rolled down from the high country. The complex harmonics of the pack's vocalizations carried messages they could feel but never fully understand. Their former patient's voice was strong among the chorus, speaking of freedom and wild places and secrets kept since the world was young. "We did the right thing," Mia said softly as the calls faded into the night, helping it heal, letting it return to its own kind. Some mysteries deserve to stay mysterious. Mike nodded, remembering the moment they'd chosen to protect something extraordinary rather than capture it. The creatures continued their ancient ways in the remote peaks above Pine Ridge, moving like shadows through territories too rough for modern humans to follow. They remained free, wild, and largely undiscovered, a living reminder that the world still held wonders beyond scientific classification or human control. Nature's deepest mysteries, they had learned, were best preserved through respect and distance. Their brief encounter with something remarkable had taught them the value of letting some secrets stay secret, of protecting the unknown from a world too eager to explain everything. As the summer night deepened around the Pine Ridge Veterinary Clinic, Mike and Mia stood watching the stars emerge above the mountain peaks. The distant howls of their extraordinary friends echoed through the valleys, carrying ancient messages in harmonics that science could never fully decode. Their encounter had changed them all. The veterinarian who chose to protect a mystery, the veteran who found new purpose in guarding nature's secrets, and the small Montana town that learned to live alongside something remarkable without needing to capture or explain it. In the highest reaches of the mountains, their former patient ran free with its pack, preserving a lineage that had survived since the Ice Age. Its presence reminded them that some mysteries were meant to remain mysterious, that nature still held secrets worth protecting. The creatures continue their ancient ways, moving like shadows through the wildest places, their existence known only to a few who learned the value of keeping some wonders wild and free. If you enjoyed this incredible story about preserving nature's mysteries, make sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you never miss another amazing tale. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Do you believe there are still undiscovered wonders hiding in the wild places of our world?